This is the Canada Abroad podcast, and I'm your host, Deanne Acres-Lans. This week, we're going to be discussing all of the announcements that IRCC has made for the week of April 28th to May 4th, 2024. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this week. Now, we do have quite a few updates that are very important to many different types of people. So we have announcements covering different types of programs and not just one specific program. The first announcement they made, which is very exciting for a lot of people, is that the parent and grandparent sponsorship program will be reopening. And when we say reopening, what that means is IRCC is going to be inviting 35,700 sponsors to apply for permanent residence for their parents or grandparents. Now, the main issue here for a lot of people is unless you entered an interest to sponsor form back in 2020, you will not be able to express your interest in sponsoring your parents or grandparents this year. If you don't have access to the email address that you use for your interest to sponsor form, or you don't remember which address you used, on May 31st, IRCC will be posting a link where you can go and enter your details, and they will provide you with the information required to let you know if you have been selected or not, and also to update your email address with them. Now, of that 35,700 applications or invitations to apply that they're sending out to the sponsors, they're only expecting to receive 20,500 completed applications. Now, the reason for this is because people completed that interest to sponsor form back in 2020, they have found over the last few years that the people they were inviting, the sponsors, they were no longer able to meet the low income cutoff, or maybe they just didn't want to sponsor their parents or grandparents anymore. So even though they're handing out a larger number of invitations to apply, they are not expecting all of those invitations to result in a completed application. Now, they will start sending out these invitations to sponsors starting May 21st, 2024, and they expect to send out all of those invitations over a 2-week period. So you need to be checking the email address that you had listed on your interest to sponsor form back in 2020, and you will want to check that you still meet the low income cutoff for this year and the previous years to ensure that you're still eligible to sponsor. And we will be providing the link to the IRCC website where you can go and check that out in the show notes for this episode. Now, the next update, which is important for quite a few people, is that the proof of funds for skilled immigrants, which is many people using the express entry system. So typically it's your federal skilled workers and your federal skilled tradespeople, unless of course they're already in Canada working, then they don't need to show that proof of funds. But the amount of money that you now need is going to be increasing on May 28th, 2024. So if you do have an express entry profile and you are required to show your proof of funds, you need to go into your profile and make the appropriate updates, assuming that you still meet the income requirement, by May 27th. And make sure when you go in and make that change that you actually don't just hit save and exit, but you hit submit on your profile, so that that is actually updated in time. If you don't do this and the amount of money that you have listed as your settlement funds is below the new low income cutoff, then after May 28th, you could receive a message that your profile is no longer eligible, because if you are a federal skilled worker or a federal skilled tradesperson who is not currently working in Canada on a work permit, if you don't meet the low income cutoff, then you're no longer eligible for that program. So make sure that you go in and just check that and make the appropriate changes. The next change that happened this week was, as of April 30th, students were no longer allowed to work full-time on study permits. So for many people, they were allowed on a study permit to work 40 hours a week due to a policy that had been implemented. The immigration minister said that that policy was not going to be extended, and students are only allowed to work 20 hours per week on their study permits. Now, of course, that doesn't apply during school holidays, but they did note that in the fall, they intend to increase this from 20 hours to 24 hours for students to be able to work. The other change that we saw this week is that the fees, the application fees and the right of permanent residence fees for all permanent residence applications increased on April 30th. So you can, again, check the show notes below for the link to see the new fees for permanent residence applications and the right of permanent residence fee. What they did note was if you paid your fees already, so for some applications, you can actually pay your fees ahead of time because you have to upload the receipt with your application. If you did pay the fees before April 30th, but you're only actually submitting your application after April 30th, you will need to go in and pay the difference. You will have to pay the difference for the updated fees. And if you submitted an application already and it was submitted before April 30th, but you didn't yet pay your right of permanent residence fee, when you are requested to pay that fee, you will have to pay the new increased fees for that as well. So that is the main changes that we have seen with immigration so far this week. And I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. We know that we did have quite a hiatus for the podcast, but we are happy to bring it back, and we will be doing weekly episodes recapping all of the immigration changes of the week. And we'll be doing mini episodes in the middle of the week on popular topics. So if you do have anything that you want us to discuss, you can just send us an email to the email address in the show notes, and we will hopefully feature it in one of our episodes for you. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.